Tea Party, I would like to welcome you to this debate for candidates for Congressional District 8. Up until Friday, we had 3 candidates that I thought would be here. Colonel Dean could not come because he had a previous commitment with his church. And Congressman Brady didn't make a decision until Friday afternoon when I called him again. And he said that he had to give his regrets because he might have a vote. Never heard that one before, but okay. So that's why, yes, we have the empty chairs. Tonight we will hear from Craig McMichael and Steve Tubbs, both are fighters for liberty. Craig served 10 years as a U.S. Combat Marine, and Steve served for the Texas State Rep, District 15. Both are fighters. They fought for us on the battlefield, and Austin is a fighter. Our moderator tonight is also a fighter. I was privileged to meet this man through what we do, and he's a strong conservative. He and his wife probably spend more time in Austin than some legislators because he just got back from there. But it was my pleasure to get to meet him and his wife, who both are for liberty is a very important part of their life and what they do now. And he's going to come tonight and lead this discussion, and hopefully you'll get a lot out of it. Mr. Dale Hubbles.
That's a great lady, isn't she? Give her a hand. Thank you. I'm honored to be here to facilitate this debate. I think we have a couple of gentlemen here of good character. We're going to explore that character a little bit tonight. We're going to explore their answers to see what type of people we want to see lead our government. Because as we know, as we can see, our government has fallen far, far short of our expectations. Tonight, I'm going to be asking a series of questions. I'll be bouncing around a little bit. There won't be one topic here and then move on to the next. We're going to bounce around just to mix it up. I'm going to ask a question. I'm going to ask one to give me a 2-minute answer. The next candidate will give me a 2-minute follow-up. After that, we're going to try to get it interesting. Either I'll ask a follow-up question or they'll volunteer something. We're going to go a little Lincoln Douglas on it, and we're going to let them talk. That's the way we should be. I believe these men are good character. They will keep it civil, that they will have a discourse, and that's what we're here to listen to. That's what we need. That's what America needs. So without further ado, give our candidates a hand, and then we'll get to questions. Okay, the first question is going to be a rather general one. And I want to ask Mr. McMichael, what are the 3 most pressing issues facing this country right now that you think are the most pressing that we as a country need to solve?
The 3 issues that are very important to me in my campaign, the top one is the national debt. It's running around $18 trillion right now. To me, a solution for that is the fair tax. The fair tax would eliminate the IRS. It would allow us to have some say in what we actually pay taxes on. I actually believe the 16th Amendment that authorized income tax is a violation of your constitutional rights. The 4th Amendment says you're securing your private property against a legal search and seizure. And when the government seizes your income before you receive it, they're violating your rights. The next one is immigration. Whether people want to admit it or not, we are at war. We are at war with Islam. They're trying to sneak into our country and attack our people. We need to instantly stop visas from all countries for Muslim nations. Stop allowing them into our country until we get a better system to allow them in. And then the last one that I'm real big on is the VA. Being a combat veteran, right now we have 8,000 veterans a year committing suicide. Of those 8,000, that's about 22 a day. It's 1 every 65 minutes. So if we sit here for 2 hours tonight, 2 veterans are going to kill themselves. The VA has completely failed them. The government, like everything else, has let them down. And it's our job to fight for these men and women when they come back home the way they fought for us overseas. I would like to start a system where we give veterans some sort of insurance card to see private doctors, to allow them to options other than the Veteran Affairs Office. But those are the three issues I think we need to work on to save our country.
Thank you, Steve.
I would add one to that, in that Planned Parenthood and what is going on with Planned Parenthood right now tears at the moral fabric of our culture. And it can't go on. We will never know the blessings of God as a country unless we're willing to stand up and fight against what Planned Parenthood is doing. It's immoral, it's wrong, it needs to stop. I agree with the debt. With this latest budget fiasco that Boehner and Brady have supported, by the time the next president comes in 2017, our debt will be at $21 to $22 trillion. This was a blank check that Kevin Brady and Boehner and this minority of Republicans agreed to. And it's a minority. It's like 25%. Even the moderate Republicans said this thing did not make any sense. All the conservatives, Louis Gohmert, and the Freedom Caucus all voted against it. All the moderates voted against it. Even some of the liberal Republicans voted against it. But Kevin Brady and 37 other Republicans, along with 100% of the Democrats, shoved this down our throat. And it's going to be a death knell for our country unless we send people there to Washington that will put an end to it. I'd also say that above and beyond the border, right now there's been a surge in the number of people coming across the border. 58% of the babies born in the state of Texas in 2013 were Medicaid births. Does that sound sustainable to anybody? When 58% of the children born in Texas are born into poverty? And this is because of our unchecked open borders. I'd also add one more thing. It's the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. How many of you have heard of it? It's going into effect in 2016. It's part of Dodd-Frank. It gives, talk about the Fourth Amendment, it gives Dodd-Frank, it sets up this commission, enables this commission to go in armed into businesses without warrants or anything to take files. It's terrible.
Steve, let me follow up with that.
Sure.
Well, I've just heard from both of you. What are the three most pressing issues in your mind? Can you explain to me briefly why we got to where we are? Why we got to where we are? Why are these issues big? What is the failure of our government that caused these things?
In May 29th, we did what everyone said couldn't be done. We were outspent May 29th, 2012, and on May 29th, there are several people in this room that were with me on May 29th, 2012. We were at Trattoria celebrating the defeat of an establishment Republican who was the fifth most powerful guy in the Texas legislature, and everyone said he couldn't be beat. We beat him by 15 points when we were outspent 10-1. On the way home, I got a call from the San Antonio Express newspaper. And she said, "Mr. Toth, you must be really excited." And I said, "Well, I am. I kind of feel like the dog that caught the car." And then she said, "Will you make a commitment right here and now to the readers in San Antonio that you will stand against the gridlock that exists in Austin?" And I said, "What gridlock?" And she said, "Come on, Mr. Toth, are you saying you don't believe that there's gridlock in Austin just like there is in Washington?" And I said, "Ma'am, are you telling me that you agree with these politicians when they tell you that there's gridlock in Austin and Washington? There is no gridlock in Austin or Washington. None. Zero. They are working together, the Republicans and the Democrats are working together like a well-oiled machine, growing the budget at 8% a year. Anyone in finance knows the rule of 72, which 8 times 9 is 72, right? Now, if you took Common Core, you wouldn't know that, but 8 times 9 is still 72. And that means that the budget every 9 years is going to grow 100%. Tell me how there's not gridlock. If they're spending money hand over fist, Dale, we're going to be the first generation that passes so much debt on to our children. Our parents' generation, the greatest generation, they took care of it.
Thank you. Craig, go ahead and give your whack at how our government's failed us.
Yeah, so I have a little different view. I actually think our government's failed us because we failed ourselves. For running this campaign for 3 years, what I found is there's a lot of good patriots, there's a lot of good citizens that are concerned about their country. They get out, they get active, and they get involved, but it's a very small minority of us. At some point, we've forgotten that it's our civic duty to reclaim this republic, to be involved in government. The answer lies in ourselves. We expect a politician to go to Washington or go to Austin or any other capital and change it, and they never will because they become part of the system. We, the people, have to stand up and change the politicians. We have to make a difference. I hear all the time in the campaign trail, Kevin Brady's a nice guy. Kevin Brady's a nice guy that has robbed us blind. He's violated our Constitution. He authorized NSA spying. He authorized U.S. citizens to be arrested and detained indefinitely without a trial. He has trampled our Constitution from start to finish. And until we as a people stand up and recognize that we're the ones that can make a difference in this country, our government will continue to fail us.
Thank you. Mr. Brady, would you like to respond? Oh, you're waiting on that Sunday vote. I'm sorry. Okay, I'd like to follow along the same vein. This year, for the first time in 100 years, we got a sitting Speaker of the U.S. House to resign. There was a lot of pressure that went into going that way. Now, without rehashing the whole situation of what caused Boehner to leave, he has a successor, the only man for the job according to the media. Nobody else could do it. I would like your opinion on the job that Paul Ryan has done. Greg?
Yeah, so I think what we saw in Washington with Paul Ryan was they knew the people were upset with Boehner. They wanted this budget bill passed, and so they were going to appease us by removing the speaker and putting somebody else in there. Like Steve spoke about earlier, anybody that's watched wrestling, the two wrestlers get in the ring, they know exactly what's going to happen. The Republicans and Democrats are the same way. The Boehner-Ryan swap was just one evil for another one. It's all a big game. It's a scam. They're using the IRS to rob us blind, to intimidate us. They use Homeland Security. They use the EPA and anything else they can to oppress the people of this nation. And the moment we, the citizens of this nation, became afraid of our government, that's the moment our government was too big and needed to be taken down a few notches.
Steve?
Political correctness is killing America, and it was egregious to hear Paul Ryan on television today basically infer that anyone that's against the Syrian refugees coming here are a bunch of bigots. That is political correctness gone awry that's killing us. One of the greatest dangers we face today is a caliphate that started, many Islamic historians believe it started in 2014 when ISIS swore allegiance to Al-Qaeda. A caliphate has started. You look at the history of Islam, rarely does one not last at least 200 years. And we've got Paul Ryan talking about saying that folks that are coming here from Syria are not dangerous. Some of them are very dangerous. Some of them are not dangerous. But enough are dangerous when it comes to the fact that only 5 of them shot up Paris and killed 100 people. It's a problem, and it's a real problem. We've got leadership like Paul Ryan and Barack Obama saying it's not a problem.
Okay, we get the idea that this is a wrestling match up there in Washington, D.C. We also know
it's not a wrestling match.
I understand, and we also know that political correctness has run rampant and wild up there. I would like to know, what do you think about Paul Ryan as a leader of the Republican Party with his utilizations of his congressional tools that he has in his toolbox? How is he leading the party, and how is he leading the Congress, at least the House portion, with today's current omnibus spending bill, the budget, everything else? Go ahead.
So, one of the worst ways to negotiate with people is to tell them up front what you're willing to give up. Ryan has basically said, just like Boehner, we will not shut down this government under any conditions. So he's basically told Obama that all the tools the Constitution gives him to stop this president, which is what the founders had intended to happen, all the tools that he has in his toolbox, Dale, he's basically thrown them down into the street and said, I'm not going to use any of them. We're going to bend over and give this president anything he wants. He said, we the people, you and me, that our expectations are too high, that we can't get anything done unless we have the White House. Originally said nothing will get done until we have a Congress, then they said nothing will get done until we have the Senate, now they're saying nothing will get done until we have the White House too. Who believes this anymore?
Greg?
Yeah, I think the problem is the National Republican Party is basically the National Democrat Party. Our party has no leadership. There's not a single person in Washington, D.C. that has the courage to do what's constitutionally right for our country. Because to them, they become an elite status of people in this country. They live like royalty while we struggle day to day to make ends meet and live inside this country. They have no interest in changing it. Their only interest is doing as little amount as possible so they can maintain their own seat in power in Washington, D.C. And they use the media to pervert the message and to maintain their power. And like I said, it's up to we the people to get involved. We have to engage people in our neighborhoods, in our churches. We have to tell our neighbors it's okay to talk more about politics than it is football. You have to be able to stand up on your own 2 feet and talk about political issues. And when somebody says, well, I don't like that, it makes me uncomfortable, say $18 trillion in debt makes me uncomfortable. This is what I want to talk about.
Okay, if you could expand on, we hear what they're saying, they're not using the tools they have. And one of the biggest tools they have is the power of the purse. Under what circumstances do you, as a freshman congressman, would think that shutting down the government, quote unquote, is necessary and is a good thing in order to preserve what powers and authorities you have under the Constitution?
The bad problem right now is Congress is supposed to pass budgets every year. They haven't done that in a long time. They passed the continuing resolutions. As a freshman congressman, obviously there'd be little I would be able to do to stop Congress, but I could have a voice and I could use whatever media would listen to us to awaken the people to our problem. Again, if you expect Washington, D.C. to change, it's never going to happen until you make it change. The 21st Amendment's proof of that.
Where would you draw your line in the sand?
My line in the sand is any extra spending. Spending needs to stop now. I would actually like to see a zero-based budget put on Washington, D.C. Currently, our government grows at 3% annually. They don't cut that. It's time to get rid of excess programs, and the way to do that is zero-base the national budget and make government agencies prove why they should exist.
Steve?
When I went to the Texas legislature, we went in with the biggest freshman class since the Sharpstown scandal. And we started organizing almost 3 months before the session started. And a bunch of us started holding conference calls. When we got to Austin, we started having, we called it a no-name group. We met on Monday nights. We would get together and we'd pray together. We would agree on what bills we were going to vote for and against. And we started voting as a block. And we're deeply committed to one another. There were 5 pastors among the 18 of us. And so if you think it was hard to get the floor for the other 13, you're right, it probably was. But we're deeply committed to one another. And there was so much unity in that group that it grew from 18 at the beginning of the session to 39 at the end of the session, which 39 out of 150 people, 95 of them Republicans, is a good number to start with. We ended up voting against the budget as a block. It was the biggest group of people from the controlling party to vote against their own party's budget in the history of Texas. And it sent a really strong message that when you grow the budget 24% in 1 year, I mean, you were there, you saw it. Club for Growth put an article in the Wall Street Journal saying Texas has gone Sacramento. Texas owes an apology for criticizing California. But it takes working with the low-hanging fruit, bringing them together, and making sure that they speak with one voice. If we keep adding people to the Freedom Caucus and we communicate with one voice, it shames the other members into voting with you. We can do this.
Okay, just for an out question before we move to the next topic, starting with you, Steve. If you're sworn in as a congressman, would you be voting for Paul Ryan as the next Speaker of the Speaker of the House?
No.
Okay. Craig?
No, I would not.
Thank you. Okay. There's been some talk about, and we're going to get to a Second Amendment question here. You know, Donald Trump, there's been a lot of talk on the news from President Obama that people on the no-fly list should not be allowed to buy guns in America. I'd like to ask, should the U.S. maintain a no-fly list that prohibits people from conducting normal activities that every other American is allowed? And if so, does the process for placing or keeping the names on a list need to be revised? Craig?
Yeah, so a lot of people don't know this, but right now the government can put you on the no-fly list and not even notify you. You wouldn't be aware of it until you went to the airport. The government's not supposed to be able to take your rights without due process. It's time to reevaluate that whole program entirely. No-fly list for U.S. citizens needs to be addressed. There needs to be some sort of process the citizens notified and they go through before they're put on a no-fly list. To take someone's rights without any recourse, it's almost impossible to get taken off the list. You have to hire attorneys. Most people don't have excess money because of the great economy that Kevin Brady's given us. It makes it very difficult. It's something that needs to be talked about. They had a great hearing about it the other day, and Trey Galley made some great points about the no-fly list.
Okay, Steve?
So the federal government has weaponized the IRS against conservatives. They've weaponized commercial aviation against conservatives, and that's what they will do with the no-fly list. They are using every club, every resource, every tool in their liberal bag to make it difficult for us. Make no mistake, they will use the no-fly list and those same crony ideas to take guns from us by saying, hey, you can't have, if you're not on the no-fly list, you can't buy weapons. They will do this to us. They've been doing it to us. We've proven that they're doing it to us. So no, it totally violates the Fourth Amendment due process.
Okay, well, it sounds to me like that's a Fourth Amendment as well as a Second Amendment issue that's sort of getting in there. Speaking of the Fourth Amendment, for another jump into another question, the government's phone records program ended 4 days before the San Bernardino shooting. Should the government's ability to monitor communications be restored to what it was prior to this expiration, and further constrained, or should it be further constrained to the pre-2001 levels, or is it at the right level now? Steve?
Boston, New York, San Bernardino. We can probably reel off another half dozen of events that have either taken place or are about to take place. Where has metadata stopped one of these events? It hasn't. Here's the thing. The government is embracing political correctness. And because they embrace political correctness, they have to spy on 320 million Americans as opposed to focusing the same way we catch pedophiles. I served on corrections and criminal jurisprudence. And to catch pedophiles, they focus in on websites that pedophiles like to visit. And it's fairly easy. You use a laser beam. We know in the federal government what websites to profile to find these people that are fundamentalist followers of Islam. But we refuse to do it. The federal government refuses to do it, and in so doing, violates First and Fourth Amendment rights by doing it. By what they're in essence doing is profiling innocent people and giving the federal government reams and reams of information to try and find that needle in a haystack. It doesn't make us safer, it makes us less safe.
Okay, Craig?
Yeah, I'm a strict constitutionalist. Under all circumstances, the Fourth Amendment is very clear. The government has no right to any of your private property without a writ or warrant signed by a judge. I'm also strongly opposed to the FISA court. It's a secret court that makes rulings in this country. Kevin Brady supports that. I've seen Brady in a meeting talk numerous times about he didn't support NSA spying, but he voted for it 3 different times. NSA spying is not needed. FBI director testified in front of Congress that has not stopped one terrorist attack, and under no circumstances should American citizens sacrifice their liberty or freedom under the false sense of security.
Dale, can I just add, even the Supreme Court has said that the administration, prior to this thing expiring, was in violation, that they weren't even following law. So this is not up for debate. The federal government has not been following its own laws. Even the courts, the liberal courts, are acknowledging that they're not following the law.
Craig, anything to add to that?
No, that's,
Okay. All right, well, moving on, let's jump to a social issue, abortion. Now, I know everybody in this room is anti-abortion through and through. However, there's been over 50 million babies aborted since Roe v. Wade. What will you do personally to commit as a congressman with all your resources that you have to stop this slaughter? What would you do, Craig McMichaels?
yeah, so I'm a firm believer that abortion should be illegal. Life starts at the moment of conception. Under no circumstances should you authorize an abortion. And I actually believe constitutionally you could use Article 3, Section 2 to make Congress overturn Roe versus Wade. Congress is the supreme lawmaker of the land. They could change the laws, push that back down to just outright ban it in this country. It's murder. It needs to be addressed as murder. It needs to be talked about that way, and it needs to be done away with.
Thank you. Steve?
340 cities across the United States interpose federal law, meaning there are laws against having illegals in your city working. And yet these cities continue to allow illegal aliens to be there and to work. They are interposing federal law. In other words, they're just ignoring it. The state of California interposes on federal immigration law, meaning they ignore it. Oregon, Washington, Colorado, they nullify federal law when it comes to drug laws. We have got to get away from amassing power at the federal level. We've got to push power out to the states and allow them on something like this to interpose and to nullify. And frankly, what Texas should do, and I as a congressman will say, is that you see the precedents where states are ignoring federal law. If you're not going to do it over life, what will you do it over? They should interpose, they should nullify, and they should go their own way. Texas should absolutely step up and ignore the federal government on this and save these unborn children.
So what you're saying is that Texas should outright ban abortion
They should
in all
ban it.
cases?
Yes.
Craig, you agree with that? You have anything further to say on
No,
that?
I think it should be banned federally. I wouldn't control a federal office, so I'd look at it that way.
I understand.
I agree with doing that, but in the absence of being able to pass a federal law, right now, tomorrow, Texas should say no more.
You know, that's interesting because that gets me to another note of mine that I wanted to ask you later, but since you brought it up, let's go ahead and pursue that line of thought of nullification, interposition, state compacts, and other avenues that states can take against an oppressive federal government. We just heard from you, Steve, about nullification with as far as abortion. Can you expand on what you consider are a proper role of states for nullification or interposition of its citizens between them and the federal government with respect to the avalanche of regulations and laws affecting their freedoms and liberties?
Sure. So we've all heard the well-worn statement, well, there's this thing called the Supremacy Clause. Y'all heard that, right? Supremacy Clause, right? That federal law trumps state law. Well, the 10th Amendment's really clear on this, which is the powers assigned to the federal government are few and defined. And then the Constitution tells us exactly what those things are. Everything else the Constitution says is left to the states. Everything else, even the things that aren't enumerated in the Constitution, even those things should be left to the states. So the Supremacy Clause is only supreme when it relates to the federal government acting within its bounds. And we as states, unfortunately, bow over and fall down and fall all over the courts, and we go to the courts and we say, Mother, may I please, to the courts, to the federal courts. Well, the federal courts are where the states go to lose their rights, not gain their rights. And at some point, the states need to stand up and just do the right thing and say, we're not going to do it. During the 83rd legislative session, Barack Obama, in January 2013, came out and said he was going to infringe on the Second Amendment. What are the last 4 words of the Second Amendment? Shall not be infringed. Shall not be infringed. Really clear. And yet, this president went and did it. And so I passed a bill in the Texas legislature called the Firearms Protection Act. Joe Strauss held it up just long enough so that it could get through the House but not make it through the Senate. And the funny thing is I came back here to Montgomery County and all these well-intentioned Republicans said, Steve, the bill wasn't constitutional. And I said, really? No, it wasn't constitutional at all. I said, I said, did you vote for Greg Abbott? And they said, yeah, we love Greg Abbott. You bet. Oh, man, he rocks. I said, did you know he wrote my bill? We worked very closely with the Attorney General's office when we put that bill together. And it does interpose. And in some areas, it nullifies. But yes, this is something that we can do. We need to make that message loud and clear to other states that you can step up to the plate, find the courage and do this. Tell the government, federal government, no.
Thanks, Steve. Craig?
Yeah, so the government was formed by the states. There's a reason why we're called the United States of America. The states are supposed to be the most powerful bodies in this country. The states, when they formed the federal government, allotted them 18 enumerated powers through the Constitution. If it's not in those powers, it's left to the states. It clearly gives the states the right to nullify federal law that violates the Constitution. You wouldn't go to federal court to argue this. There's a few ways you can start to fight back against this. So right now, the federal government blackmails us like a parent with our own money. You saw this in Louisiana when the federal government wanted to raise the drinking age to 21, and the state refused. The federal government cut off their highway funds. That's why the roads are so bad. So the federal government attacked a state through financial means. What we can do to protect ourselves from that is pass the fair tax. It allows the states to control the money. Nullification would also allow the states to fight back against the overreach of Supreme Court laws that violate Texas Constitution. The Constitution, there's a reason why each state has its own Constitution. It's clear that we're supposed to control our own destinies. We're all supposed to be little experiments of democracy, little republics that decide what we want to do with our own future. If you don't like what your state's doing, you can leave. When the federal government blankets everything, controls you like a master, we become slaves to something we have no control over. The nullification is very important. I think it should be used. Supremacy clause, like Steve said, you hear that a lot. And it's amazing the way it's modified through the years. So you take Arizona, when they passed a immigration law that required driver's license for voting, and the federal government came down and shot that down and said it was supremacy clause. The supremacy clause just means that the federal government, under its enumerated powers, makes the supreme law of the land. But it shouldn't mean that the states can't enforce federal law that the federal government's refusing to do. We'd use this in Texas with securing our border, immigration policies. The federal government's porous border, we have Syrians coming across the border. We have, I think it's 42 immigrants a day that they're catching. And I think for every one they catch, there's 2 they don't catch. So the state of Texas could protect itself by enforcing its own federal law.
Well, let me follow up to that. You
Hey,
both mentioned...
Can we stay on this a second?
Yes, please.
So, a resource I'd encourage you guys to pursue is the Texas Public Policy Foundation. They're out of Austin, Texas. It's a conservative think tank. It's one of the best in the United States. Mario Loyola is their 10th Amendment chairman. He worked very closely with Ted Cruz when Ted Cruz was Solicitor General for the state of Texas. He worked on these cases where Cruz sued the federal government over and over and over again. He's brilliant. And he and I worked on a bill called the Fair Funding Act. And what it basically said, the 2 Supreme Court decisions told the federal government, slapped them down actually, said anytime that there's funding that goes down to the states and it contains coercive strings, that's what Craig was talking about, that compels them to do something in order to get the money, that is unconstitutional. The problem is that the states won't step up to the plate, and even though there have been 2 Supreme Court rulings in our favor, the states won't step up and go after the federal government. So we put this bill together called the Fair Funding Act, and Joe Strauss would not allow it out of committee.
Well, what I would like to know is, I mean, you do mention states are not stepping up to assert their own rights, but where is the Congress stepping up and saying that you've gone too far, executive branch, or you've made an improper decision, Supreme Court, the judicial branch? Where are you encouraging your states to stand up and say, that's not right, it's outside their authority, etc.? This will be for Craig. to hit on. So, as a congressman in the legislative branch, what will you do? Will you be standing up just at a bully pulpit type of thing? Or what can you do to address these type of grievances where you have an overbearing, extra authority, where the Supreme Court is speaking outside their authority and rendering opinions, not law, just opinions and decisions? What would you do?
I think you have to look at the true heart of the problem in this country, and that's the people in Washington, D.C. don't want to change anything. They want to maintain power. They want to control us. It's about authority over the people. What you could do as a congressman is Washington's dying for leadership. You put a strong congressional candidate in office in Washington, some of the, like Steve said, the low-hanging fruit will latch on and they'll start following your lead. People want a leader. They want somebody that's not afraid to stand up and tell people the truth. The other side of that is you have to engage the citizens in this country, not just in your own congressional district, but across the entire nation, and let them know that it's our responsibility. At some point, we can no longer sit back and point our finger at Washington and say, well, Barack Obama's violating the Constitution. My Congress is not standing up and doing what they're supposed to do. We control the country. We, the people, control this country. It's our job to make sure they do their job, and we're not doing our job.
You know, when Senator Cruz stood up in the well of the Senate and called Mitch McConnell, the majority leader, a liar for lying to him, do you think that's an appropriate thing to do? And would you think that that would be appropriate in the U.S. House of Representatives?
So, Braden and I filed with the Republican Party our papers to be on the ballot. And at that meeting, State Representative Lance Gooden was there. And Lance got beat, he got spanked by a real conservative. He's one of those most liberal members of the Texas legislature. You know who he is. This is a guy that will vote with the Democrats. I was 2 rows up from the clerk on the floor, and as soon as he cast his ballot with the Democrats, he would blaze a trail from the back of the House floor up to the clerk to change his vote. So in the clerk's record, it shows him voting with me and the conservatives when he really voted with the Democrats. This guy's terrible. So we exposed him, and he got beat. Again, he outspent the guy maybe 20-1. He had well over $1 million of Joe Strauss's money, and he got beat by a guy that spent like $15,000, Stuart Spitzer spent. Here's the point. He said to me and Braden while we were there getting ready to sign our papers, I said, so how's Stuart Spitzer been? He goes, well, he's kind of nice now. He's not like you. I said, what? He said, well, he's a quiet no. You weren't a very quiet no, which is why Joe Strauss didn't like you. And so, yes, I think it's completely appropriate to do what Ted Cruz did. It's the only way the people find out what's truly going on. We can't have people that go to Washington and snow us. Kevin Brady in August said, isn't it terrible that Planned Parenthood is selling baby parts? Shouldn't we defund them? Send your $10 to this web address, right? And so people think, yay, Kevin, that's great. You're going to defund Planned Parenthood. Then what does he do 2 months later? Funds them, right? Because we don't know about it. I'm going to go and educate people. And I think Craig will too.
Yeah, I want to be clear with everybody on this. I did 3 combat tours in the Marines, and I watched good men die for this country. I have no problem standing up in Congress, in Congressional District 8, in the state of Texas, and anywhere else, and challenging anybody that's violating my Constitution. November of this year was 20 years ago that I signed up for the Marines. And when I raised my right hand and took that oath to defend this country against all enemies, foreign and domestic, it meant something to me. And when I got out of the Marines, I took the uniform off, but I didn't change my passion and love for this country. I will challenge anybody that violates our Constitution. I will get in their face. I will argue with them. I will call them a liar. I will make sure that people are aware of what's going on in this country. I've spent 3 years of my life not only working a full-time job and trying to make it in the economy that our government's given us, but trying to educate my fellow citizens on your constitutional rights and your ability to change this republic.
Thank you. I have a new question for you. Craig, what's the role of the federal government in education?
Constitutionally, there is no role of the federal government in education. The Department of Education should be shut down entirely, and the state should decide what they're supposed to do.
You got a hand, you might as well go forward with it.
I think Common Core has been a disaster. If you look, the Department of Education was formed with the purpose of providing school lunches for kids, and it's morphed into a monster. They're actually pushing education standards. It's our job as parents, it's our jobs as teachers, it's our jobs as community leaders to decide what's best for our children. A lot of people talk about homeschool. I'm a fan of homeschool. If you want to homeschool your kid, you know what's best for your child, you do it. If you want to send them to the education systems provided, then you do that also. But the federal government has no business telling any parent what they should do with their kid when it comes to education.
Thank you, Steve.
So the Department of Education was Jimmy Carter's payoff to the National Teachers Union. And it amasses more money than you can shake a stick at, and unfortunately, it's money that doesn't go to the local schools. It just stays in Washington, paying for useless studies and programs that never impact a single child. And when the money is released to the local schools, it comes with coercive strings. It starts out at 100% funding, and then within a few years, it tails off to 80%, 40%, and so on and so forth, until it becomes an unfunded mandate. You look at why schools struggle today, and it's because of all these unfunded mandates from the federal government and from state governments. One of the worst ones was No Child Left Behind. You talk to any parent, you talk to any teacher, you talk to any administrator, this thing was a disaster. An absolute disaster. You can go into liberal districts, you can go into conservative districts. This is something where we all come together and say, wow, what a train wreck. Should have gone away. What happened 2 weeks ago? We snatched defeat from the jaws of victory when Kevin Brady voted to refund No Child Left Behind. The clock had run out. Republicans had come up with a new scheme. It wasn't all that good. And Barack Obama still wouldn't support it until what did he do? He got early childhood development into it. What was his number one priority after he got Obamacare passed? Universal pre-K. And he got it. This bill funds universal pre-K. We're heading in the wrong direction. We don't need strong, powerful, centralized government telling our schools how to educate kids. And yet, Brady continues to step up to the plate and fund it.
So what is the solution? You have this federal overreach that is not in the Constitution. What is our solution for this? How do we address this? How do we fix it? How do we get the federal government out of our classrooms and out of our parent-child relationships? Steve?
The very first thing we do is we shut down the Department of Education. Test scores have not gone up since the Department of Education was established back in the 70s. They've gone down. It's been an abysmal failure. You look in the private sector, what company continues to support a division that continues to lose more and more money, that continues to fail? Yet the federal government, every time this happens, every time we see more test scores going down, we just double down and pour more money into it. We need to absolutely shut down the Department of Education and let the states develop their own curriculum and their own standards.
Craig, how possible is that? And if you will go ahead and expand on that answer of what needs to be done.
Yeah, it's very possible. Congress controls the purse. They control the funding for the Department of Education. They could just defund it. It would go away very quickly. When you talk about the state levels, I think as a congressman you can influence local officials. Everybody wants to hold on to power, so as a congressman you can say, hey, you're going to help us do something at the state level, or we're going to come out and actively campaign against you. And I'd be willing to do that with anybody inside my district that isn't conservative enough to hold our values. We form a coalition of people to do what my vision, my dream is, and that's awaken people to their constitutional freedoms. It's going to be broad and wide. But you defund education, you work at the state to make sure. We spend more money per student than any nation in the world, and our students are failing. lot of kids graduate high school and can't even get into college and take college classes without remedial. That's a complete failure. The other problem is, and I wouldn't control this at the federal level, but this is why you can push the state people, is you could work very hard with the districts, because right now there's no accountability for kids that don't want to be in school. We have students that are in school that are absolute disaster in the classroom. They interfere with everybody that's attempting to learn and to better themselves. It needs to be addressed. There needs to be accountability for those kids. It's free education. It should be for everybody. But there should be some sort of guidelines and standards.
Okay, well, let me clarify that answer for myself. I know that we've been told all my life that public education is a free education and that everybody is available for everybody. Well, again, what about those who do not want that free education? It seems our system pushes them into the education system, even though they're, like you say, quote unquote, a disaster. They don't want to be there. They have other life goals than what it is that we're looking for of giving public education.
Yeah. Now, these are state level, so if you close the Department of Education, these are state issues that the State House would have to deal with. But I think you could address it. I actually have an idea that at 16, you would have different options in high school. You could be identified as a student that wants to go to college, and you could take classes to prepare you for that. Or you could be a student that wants to do some sort of trade, and you could go to an apprenticeship for welding, for plumbing, something that would help the local community. Because let's be honest, there are certain kids by the time they're 16, they don't want to take any more science classes. They don't want to go to a math class anymore. They know in their mind it's not what they want to do. Maybe they know they want to join the military. You funnel these kids in different ways to prepare them for their future. I saw a great comic the other day that had a giraffe, a penguin, a fish in a bowl, and a monkey sitting there. And the teacher was like, okay, we're going to take a test. We're going to climb that tree. Well, the fish in the bowl is going to fail that test. But it doesn't mean the fish is stupid. You can't educate everybody the same way. Each kid is individual and unique. We have to identify that and start teaching to the kids and not teaching for these tests.
Steve?
When I was in the Texas legislature, I got to pick last for my office, and the row next to us of offices, it was known as Liberty Lane. Brian Hughes, David Simpson, Matt Schaefer, Scott Turner were on it. It was just all these rock star conservatives, but because I got to pick so late, I got stuck on Liberal Lane with all the Democrats. And I think it was the third or fourth day of session, and I was in the office, and these 5 young girls with their teacher came into my office from inner city Houston, and this woman was just shell-shocked, because I was at the very end, and she had been just blistered by every Democrat about why vouchers and charter schools were such an evil thing. And she came into my office not knowing if I was a Democrat or a Republican. And she said, will you please just listen about, and let me make my case about why this is so important, why charter schools are so key to these kids. She said all these kids are at-risk children. They all come from single-parent households where the one parent that they had was probably on drugs and didn't have a job and was on welfare and had been in and out of jail. Please, Representative, please listen to my case. And I said, yeah, I'd love to hear your case. She had no idea that was pro-charter schools and pro-vouchers. And I said, I'd love to hear your story. And these girls started weeping as they talked about how they would have dropped out of school by their sophomore. 80% of the school of the kids in the inner city of Houston drop out by the time they're sophomores. And 40% of them will be in prison at some point in their life in Texas. And after I heard these stories, and I had a hard time keeping it dry, and it was really a compelling deal. And I said to their teacher, I said, what's your story? And she goes, well, I left the public schooling. I said, why did you leave? You're an incredible teacher. Why did you leave the public school? And she said, I want to spend time with kids, and I've only got so many years to work. And I went to work for a charter school, and I got a 30% pay increase. And because it came with none of the strings, I didn't have to do any paperwork. So I get to spend my time with these great girls. I get to spend extra time with them. I get to pour my life into them. I mean, it's really exciting. And what it goes to show is that money should follow the kids and the teachers, the best teachers. So that whether those kids or that teacher wants to go to a charter school or a private school, they can do that, and the money follows the kid up to the teacher. Right now, it goes the opposite direction, and it funds all this bureaucracy. 20 years ago, for every 5 teachers, you only had 1 non-teaching position in the state of Texas. 5 teachers, 1 non-teaching position. You know what it is today? It's 1 to 1. You know who the biggest employer in the United States is? It's the Texas education system. There's so much bloated bureaucracy. And so, to answer your question, money that comes back from the federal government, eliminate the Department of Education. And if there is money that is to flow back to the states, it must flow back to the states through children and teachers, not through bureaucracy.
Thank you. Craig, do you have any follow-up comments on that?
No, sir, I'm good.
Okay. All right, well, let's move to something else that you guys may have an opinion on. You certainly are not liking so far. You know, one of the great weapons in the Democratic quiver that they assault the Republicans with time and time and time again is corporate welfare. And it seems like we can never have a good victory ending what is truly corporate welfare on our side until this year. In 2015, the Export-Import Bank was expired. Congress was unable to muster the will between Republicans and Democrats to reauthorize it. However, this recent vote last month on the transportation bill reauthorized corporate welfare in the form of reauthorizing the Export-Import Bank. How did that happen, Craig McMichaels?
Yeah, you know what's funny about that vote is our opponent that didn't show up tonight, he actually bragged.
Who's that, Craig?
Yeah, that's Kevin Brady.
Okay.
What was that? Kevin Brady? Yeah.
I thought he would be over. I wanted to meet him and shake his hand, but maybe some other time.
This is the best that we could get from him.
You know, he bragged a lot about the Import-Export Bank and the vote they made to do away with it. And then when no one was paying attention, they slipped it into a transportation bill, and they brought us back the Import-Export Bank. This is what's wrong with our government, is they've made it so complex and so bloated that it's almost impossible to follow it and keep up with it. I've been running for office for 3 years, and there's things that I miss because the bills are so big, they're so massive. Unless you have a staff of people that are reading them for you, it's hard to keep up with it. Our government's position should never be to promote certain businesses over others. The free market is always the best way to go. It is always a winner. If a business is going to fail, allow it to fail, allow some entrepreneur to come behind them, buy up their assets, and start another business with it. Right now, we have an economy that's a disaster waiting to happen. We are on above a major collapse economically. Our dollar is a fiat currency, and the Federal Reserve is hiding it all from us, and we can't even do an audit of our own money. It's time that we stand together as a people, recognize what's going on, because we have 2 options here. We can either blindly sit on this train and run off the cliff, or we can get off the train and control our fall. Me being a Marine, combat Marine, I would rather control my own destiny. It's going to be bad, but let's decide what happens, and let's not just go along to go along, and then when it all collapses, we wonder what happened.
Thank you. Steve, what's it?
One of the things that needs to change in Washington is this is a House rule change. So in the state of Texas, you could never take an XM vote and put it on transportation because the two have nothing in common, right? So one of the very first things is that we need a change in the way things are done so that this could never happen. Export-Import Bank is not germane to transportation. No how, no way. And so we need a rule change. That's number one. Number two, even under Denny Hastert, which no one would look at Denny Hastert and say, now that guy is a grassroots conservative. Hastert still believed that the answers for America needed to come from the Republican Party, not the Democrat Party, the Republican Party. And Boehner has been lazy Paul Ryan is showing the same laziness, which is, you know what, I'm just going to find a simple majority. Well, if you're just looking for a simple majority among liberals, you'll get 100% of the Democrats and about 30% of the Republicans, and that's the way you'll always come up with these bad, crooked deals. That's got to change.
So, let me continue along this line. Export-Import Bank deals with trade issues. It's free trade. Do you support unconditional free trade?
If it's truly free trade. But here's the problem right now, and this is something I agree with Donald Trump on, is there's so much currency manipulation right now that it's not free. And so between the Export-Import Bank and China devaluing the yuan and Europe devaluing its currency, Japan devaluing its currency, these are all ways of making their products more affordable overseas, which is a way of subsidizing. It's really not truly free trade. So my belief is that any tariff that another country puts up against our products coming into their country, that we put those same tariffs up against their products coming into our country.
Greg?
Yeah, so what we need to recognize is the economic powerhouse that America is. Everybody wants to trade with us. Everybody wants to sell their goods in our country. We can use this to our advantage to rebuild our economy. Like Steve said, it's hard to find free trade. People use words that don't exactly carry the meaning. Most of you may not know this, but our opponent, again, it's not here tonight, was a big...
Is that correct?
It's Kevin Brady. Okay. He was a big supporter of NAFTA, and I've debated this with people because NAFTA was passed before he was in office. But like most bills, it was passed and was set to expire. He's the congressman that carried it when it was going to expire and made sure that it stayed in. Statistics have shown that NAFTA has sent over 10 million jobs overseas. Those are good American manufacturing jobs that we've lost because our congressman wanted to support his Chamber of Commerce friends over the people of this country. It's time that we recognize what's going on and stand up together. Don't allow somebody to say free trade to confuse the facts. Free markets are good, but not free trade.
Okay, how do you feel about the upcoming fight over the Trans-Pacific Trade Pact? I guess in the last couple of months we've just started to see what was in it, and it is a massive trade bill. What is your opinion of that? Because if you're elected, I dare say it may still be an issue laying on the table when you get into Congress.
Like you, I haven't had an opportunity to read the whole TPP, but I can tell you I would do exactly with it what I would do with NAFTA, and that's I'd rip it up and throw it in the trash. Our government's making trade laws. The government's making trade laws right now that benefit the economies of other countries because they don't care about the people of this nation. They care about making money for themselves, cronyism, their friends, and the companies that they choose to support, not what's best for America as a whole.
The Chamber of Commerce has committed $100 million in this election cycle to defeating conservatives. $100 million. Not Democrats. Not Democrats in any way, shape, or form, but conservatives, free market conservatives. And they're all in for this. They are all in for it. And this is just crony capitalism 201.
Right, we get the crony capitalism portion of it, and I guess we're talking trade as an instrument of state.
You know, all we need are open markets, free market, and I'll support that in any way, shape, or form. But every time we go into one of these trade deals, we come out on the losing end. The commerce, and a few corporations that have provisions in the bill are the only people that come out ahead. But the American worker never comes out ahead.
Rick, anything else?
No, sir, I have nothing else.
Okay. Well, when we get to talking about treaties, trade pacts, etc., Obama has started a trend of where he does not say that what their agreements with another country is in fact a treaty. And he is doing that more and more. In fact, I'm understanding that the climate change treaty that 100 and some odd countries, it depends on who you listen to, how many have actually joined, is a an executive agreement and not exactly a treaty. How do you feel about our executive branch making all these agreements, international agreements, executive agreements, and not binding treaties by the U.S. government?
Yeah, that's a violation of our Constitution. The Senate was formed. One of its goals was to make treaties with foreign nations. If you study our country historically, when the Constitution was argued, they debated about the upper house of Congress, different ways to elect the Senate. The final decision that was made was the state representatives from each state would elect a senator and send them to Washington, D.C., well, 2 senators, send them to Washington, D.C., and the purpose was the Senate, by appointing judges and confirming treaties with other nations, were supposed to protect the 10th Amendment and states' rights. When the 17th Amendment of the Constitution was passed, we lost that. Now we have another branch of government that's all about Washington, D.C. and growing power. It used to be a state representatives could recall a senator and bring them back to the state when they weren't doing their job. We've lost this ability. Slowly, through the course of our history, our government, through the 14th Amendment, the 16th Amendment, the 17th Amendment, have taken our rights from us. We have to address this, and there's a way to fix it. It's an Article 5 Convention of the States. You get enough states, 34 of them, to call for a convention. You need 39 states to ratify it. And I hear all the rumors all the time about a runaway convention, but it's absolutely impossible to happen. For a runaway convention to happen, you would have to have a violation of the Constitution, or our government would collapse anyways. It would only take 11 states to stop the amendment from passing. But we can do a convention of the states, get rid of the 17th Amendment, put term limits on Congress. We're not supposed to have career politicians. We're supposed to have men and women that serve their country out of honor and respect, and they go back home and live their lives.
Steve?
Sure. So one of the most egregious ones as of late is the deal with Iran. It was not called a treaty. For all intents and purposes, it lists the trade ban on Iran. It right away frees up $150 billion of cash that they will use to subsidize terrorism around the world. It allows them to export oil again, which means the free flow of cash in U.S. dollars into Iran to, again, underwrite terrorism around the world. It enables them to get the nuclear bomb, which, I think if World War II and Adolf Hitler from Mein Kampf taught us anything, is that when your enemy promises to come and kill you, you should take him seriously. What it has caused, the Iranians are Shia Islam, the Islamists. They're 15% of the Middle East. 85% are Sunni Islamists. The 85% would rather trust Israel with the bomb, which they do have the bomb, and they would rather trust the Jews with the bomb than the Shia Islamists with the bomb. So what has this caused? This has caused a nuclear arms race now in the Middle East. The Saudis are looking for the bomb. The Jordanians, I've heard as well, are looking for the bomb, and they will just buy it on the open market from Pakistan or from Korea, North Korea. This has been an abysmal failure. It will cause the Middle East to implode. And yet this Congress will not step up and stop him. And they could stop him by simply forcing a government shutdown until he comes to them through the Senate to negotiate a deal the way the Constitution asks and requires him to do it. But this Congress, Kevin Brady, will not use his authority, will not use his power, will not use his tenure to do what's right for us.
I'd actually like to add to that. Congress has the power of impeachment, and Barack Obama has clearly violated the Constitution of the United States. The Bo Bergdahl trade, the Iran deal, these are all things where he aided and abetted the enemies of our country, and Congress should bring impeachment charges against our president and remove him from office.
Okay, I'd like to spend a little time on immigration, both the legal kind and the illegal kind, because it's not the same issue, even though the media portrays it as such, even though the politicians in Washington, when they talk illegal immigration or legal immigration, they're all confusing it and making the same thing. So right now, I'd like to talk about legal immigration. We have basically 1 million people a year come into this country legally that just, they come in and the federal government, through its charities that it funds, to the tune of millions of dollars, resettles these immigrants, refugees, etc. here in this country. With everything that's going on in Europe, the Paris attacks, I believe 6 of the 8 attackers were legal residents, but they came from immigrated people. The same with the San Bernardino attackers. One was a U.S. citizen, but the other one was in here on a K-1 fiancé visa. What would you do to tighten up the federal visa system and the federal immigration program together, the legal one? We'll get to the illegal stuff in a minute. Craig, go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, I love it. We need to be clear here, there's a difference between refugees and immigrants. People come to this country legally through the immigration process. There's nothing wrong with that. We have guidelines in place that monitor that. I think all refugees at this point should be stopped. Again, our nation is at war with Islam. They are trying to kill us. We don't need to bring refugees in. You don't let the enemy in the front door. The visa programs are a disaster right now. The illegal immigration that's coming in. What's happening is people are getting a school visa or a work visa. They're coming to our nation. They're disappearing, and our government's making no attempt to find them. Again, this is a violation of federal law. The federal government's there to uphold the law, not to pick and choose which laws they want to enforce. Our Attorney General is directly responsible for that, Department of Homeland Security, and Congress has the power to bring these people in and hold them accountable for their lack of action.
Steve?
So Tashfeen Malik, she's the one that had the K-1 fiancé visa. The Pakistani government, I'm sorry, our State Department, or I should say our embassy in Pakistan, did not catch the fact that she lied about what street she lived on. In fact, there is no house there. They couldn't even, I mean, you've got Google Maps. You would think that someone with any horse sense at all, before they allowed this person to move on to the next government agency, would have at least checked to see if the address was right. She lied about it. She was then passed on to the NSA, and the NSA didn't catch it. She was then passed on to DHS. DHS didn't catch it. Yet we think that we can allow 65,000 people in here legally, and we can't even verify what their nation of origin is. And now we're finding that on top of that, that ISIS actually has the capability of producing passports. For as little as $200, they can produce passports that will rival anything that's out there, and you cannot tell the difference between them. This makes no sense at all. I mean, it's suicidal. So I feel like until we can get a handle on allowing people to come here and vet them properly, we need to say no. Kevin Brady supports the House's version, which is recertification of these people. So the Senate, there are members of the Senate, Ted Cruz, is saying until we can verify nation of origin, we need to say no refugees in the United States whatsoever, none, 0 zip. Where the House is saying, oh no, we can let them come, we'll just recertify and make sure that the president's plan is really, that we've really looked at it really closely. There is no way to look really closely at it. We don't have the means by which to do that.
Well, you know, they're talking about loss of traceability of the visa holders. I mean, they're saying there's no way to trace them now. Well, they had to do documentation to get in this country. Donald Trump got into a lot of trouble last week. Well, the media thought he was in a lot of trouble, but it turned out he rose in the poll after his comments of saying all Muslims, we must stop allowing any Muslim to come into this country until we figure out what the heck is going on, okay? The media thought that that would be a death blow for him, yet he actually rose in the polls off of that. I know Jimmy Carter, back in the Iranian crisis, the Iranian hostage crisis, he stopped Iranian Muslims from coming to this country. He also deported 13,000 Iranians on student work visas. How would you be supportive of deporting people here already on a visa that come from a Muslim terrorist country? Craig?
Yeah, so again, we're at war. We're at war with Islam. They're trying to kill us. When you're at war, you make exceptions to your normal evaluate all the visa holders from those Muslim nations, track them down, find them, and if they appear to be a risk, they need to go back to where they came from. There's nothing more important than the safety and security of the American people themselves. It's our job as representatives in your government to make sure that you're safe. We basically have two jobs. Protect your liberty and freedom, your birthrights given to you by God, and to make sure that those are safe and you can live peacefully in the pursuit of your own happiness. If it's not falling in those mandates, we're violating what we're supposed to be doing.
In 1952, a Democrat president wanted to leave very loose immigration policy. And he had a Democrat House and a Democrat Senate, and it was the McCarran-Walker Act, which sought to basically tighten up immigration policies and limit people, communists, coming into the United States. And the McCarran-Walker Act went through, and the president vetoed it, and Congress overrode the veto. And then a couple days later, the Senate overrode the veto. That's a functioning government where Congress says to the president, you can't have your way. There's this thing called we the people. We didn't elect a king. We elected a president, and that president has to answer to co-equal branches of the government. And these co-equal branches of the government said, no, you're not going to have it. That's the responsibility of Congress to do the right thing, to step up and do the right thing, and this Congress refuses to do it.
You know, they've also, the talking heads on all the news shows, go that limiting these immigrants, these legal immigrants, is not constitutional. Are they right? And do these potential people coming to our country, do they have a right of religious freedom, even though they are non-United States citizens and they are not members of our country?
The only people that should have protection under our Constitution are American citizens. Not some of the Number one, Muslim is a culture. Islam is a religion. So, Islam is a religion. Muslims, that is a culture. And what we're saying is that countries, Muslim countries that are at odds with our way of life, we're going to say no to you coming into our country until we have a way of vetting and verifying that you're not going to create problems in our country. You don't get First Amendment protection if you're not from this country.
Thank you. Craig?
Yeah, I agree with Steve on the statement that our constitutional freedoms only apply to U.S. citizens. I also think immigration's always been a federal issue. It always has, it always should be. So the federal government has the right to say who can and cannot come into this country. And it's been modified many times since 1871 with the Constitution ratified. We could modify it again.
Okay, well, let me I'm torn between two questions now. Let me go ahead and ask the first one. I'll get back to the second one. You say that immigration should always be under the authority of the federal government. Yet, through the advent of a congressionally consented to interstate compact, could not some of that federal authority be granted to the border states at least to maintain their borders and deal with the immigration issues? Now, I know we're crossing into the illegal immigration issue, but to defend our borders and give the states that federal authority that we see today is not being upheld.
I touched on this earlier, and I believe this wholeheartedly. The states have the right to defend their own borders. The federal government has laws in place that states what immigration is legal. There's nothing wrong with a state upholding federal law when the government refuses to. The government's going to come attack the state for enforcing its own laws. It just doesn't make sense. The problem is we need people in the state that understand their purpose and are willing to tell the federal government, we're going to protect our citizens if you're not. Force the federal government to do their job.
This is equivalent to Obama believing that we'll be safer if we take guns away from law-abiding citizens, right? So I've flown over the Texas-Mexico border several times in the Rio Grande Valley. And you look at that area, roughly half that area, those are federal lands, which means DPS can't drive a car, can't drive an SUV on those lands, because those are federal lands and they're protected. They're protected for the cartels is what they're protected for. So the cartel will drive through that area for entrance or exit. They will drive through there, but DPS, Department of Public Safety, can't. They either have to be on foot or on horse. Well, I have news for you. A horse is not going to keep up with this sport utility vehicle. It's not going to happen. And so we've got a situation where we're obeying, we're playing nice with federal immigration law, while as Major General John Nichols, who's the Adjutant General of the Texas Armed Forces, will tell you that it's, for everyone we catch, and these are aliens of interest. They're Mexicans, they're OTMs other than Mexicans, and then they're aliens of interest. Some of these are people that come from Asia, and they're human trafficked into our country. These are young girls. And some of these are people that are coming from Arab countries, and they're here to do us harm. They're not here to cut lawns. They're not here to work in kitchens. They're here to do us harm. And for every one that we catch, there are 5 more that are getting through. The problem we have is that we should not be obeying federal law as it pertains to these individuals. We should be driving trucks. We should be driving cars on these federally protected lands to intercept these people. And when they get across the river, instead of handing them over to ICE, Immigration Customs Enforcement, we should give them a bottle of water and a sandwich and take them to a border crossing and tell them goodbye.
Amen. I want to add to what he's saying. If you study the Constitution, the federal government has no authority to own land inside the state of Texas. The state needs to address that. As a congressman, you can work with state representatives to enforce that. The BLM, the Bureau of Land Management, is unconstitutional. And until we stand up and start talking about these things, they're going to keep violating our rights.
Staying with the illegal immigration and the open borders issue, being a Texas border volunteer, I've gone down to the border and spent many a night out there watching for illegal aliens coming across through the ranch lands. But I hear there's a controversy down there with some of the ranch owners on the Rio Grande. When we say build a wall, some of these ranchers say, well, I need the Rio Grande and its resources in order to water my cattle and use its resources for my own benefit because it's my private property. Others, of course, say build a wall, build a wall. Looking at the topography of the Rio Grande, obviously you can't not build a continuous wall from one end of Texas to the other. Where do you come down exactly on defending our border with technology, with physical barriers, and with personnel?
I'm going to go over.
Craig, go ahead.
Okay, so you literally can't build a wall straight across the Texas border. If you study the border, it's impossible. But we have the technology available to make a digital wall, and they're very effective when they're made. We could use the National Guard. We could use troops on the border. Me personally, I believe the illegal immigration problem is a simple solution of a better life. These people live in countries where they are in horrid conditions, and they want to come here and receive a better life. When they come here, they're getting services from the federal government that they don't deserve because they're not citizens, and the government's allowing it. I'm talking about welfare, food stamps, education, medical. If we stopped allowing this, in 1986, when Ronald Reagan passed the Immigration Reform Care Act, one of the top things in that act was you couldn't even get a job in this country unless you were a U.S. citizen. If we just enforced federal law, we would find some of the illegal immigration wouldn't be a problem anymore. You wouldn't be here if you couldn't get a job and you couldn't receive the goods and services that you were looking for. But a digital wall would work great. Where we've actually placed it, it's been shown to be very effective.
Yeah, it's amazing. If you look at a map, it looks like this relatively straight line between Mexico and Texas, and it's not. I mean, it's just unbelievably
It's a crooked river.
It's a very crooked river. And so there are areas where we could use a wall, but there are other areas where, frankly, we need drones over the northern part of Mexico, and we need digital eyes in the sky. Texas has these things called caravans. They fly at about 14,000 feet. They have the ability to scan almost a 100-mile stretch, and anywhere that it picks up border activity crossing, it puts the camera right down on it, and then it alerts boots on the ground. The problem is we don't have enough boots on the ground. This is a problem that creates an opportunity to solve another problem. Roughly 45% of the Marines, you know where they hail from? Come on, say it. Texas, you bet. No state steps up to defend the liberties of our country like Texas does. As Craig talked about earlier, the Center for Disease Control does not say that this is an epidemic, the number of young men taking their lives. It's a pandemic. I'm on the board of directors for a ministry called Mighty Oaks, and we've had over 800 men go through this program, not one suicide in 5 years. We've had about 6 guys that have taken their lives that couldn't get in because we just didn't have the spots available for them in time. When a veteran gets off the plane from Iraq or Iran, they lose a sense of mission, purpose, unit cohesion, and a job all at once. And we wonder why they struggle. Why not bring these guys back and put them in the Texas State Guard? The Texas State Guard is a branch of the U.S. Army, but it is under the Texas Constitution, they answer to the governor of Texas. They do not answer to the federal government. They are controlled 100% by the governor. They are the governor's militia. We're one of the few states that actually has militia. And what I would like to see is for Texas to step up, arm the guard, take these young men when they come back from Iran or Iraq or Pakistan, wherever they're coming from overseas, put them in the Texas State Guard. They have a sense of mission, purpose, unit cohesion. Put them on the border for a month, and then bring them back home for a month. Let's see how they're integrating, how they're doing it finding a job, how they're doing it becoming a husband and a father again. If they need counseling, let's give them counseling. Send them back down to the border for another month. It's a way of helping these guys, loving these guys, encouraging these guys, while at the same time taking care of a real need that we have.
Thank you. Just read recently where in the last 2 months, Texas has had 11,000 unaccompanied minors cross our southern border. The federal government is overrun in their holding facilities in South Texas. They are currently, today, moving 1,000 unaccompanied minors into Ellis County and Rockwell County. They are doing this on private property by paying the owners of the facilities they're moving them into. The county cannot stop them. The sheriff's department is paying for extra shifts, extra surveillance of these areas to watch these basically young men being shipped into their counties without being told and without being funded for it. As a potential congressman, what do you think is the proper response for the federal government moving people into communities that have not been asked, do not look for this, and they are just done at their own whims? Go ahead, Craig.
Yeah, so we're catching illegal immigrants coming across our border. We're shipping them further into our country. Sometimes we're flying them around the country at taxpayers' expense. There's a holding facility here in Montgomery County known as Southwest Keys that some of you may not be aware of. They're releasing them after a certain amount of time with a notice to show up in court to be held against their legal status. It's not our government's responsibility to maintain people. First, you need the fence. You can stop them from coming across. But instead of shipping them into the country, we need to ship them back out of the country. When they cross the border, let's load them up on a plane and let's send them right back where they came from.
Steve?
How many of you have been on a missions trip down to Mexico? Anyone? A few of you. I've been on several with my kids. There was a time when you could actually go down to border towns where we built schools, we built homes. We've done medical missions where we brought doctors down there, and I mean, seen 1,500 people in one day. It is the coolest thing. All that has stopped. Doesn't go on anymore. And it's not because no one wants to go down there. It's because the cartels control the northern border of Mexico. The northern portion of Mexico is a failed state. It's run by the cartels. Missionaries won't go down there because they're abducted. And if families won't pay the ransom, they're beheaded. Or I won't even tell you what some of the things that they've done. But the answer is not to just create open borders and allow these kids to come in here, where we have seen a huge increase in the number of cases of mumps. Mumps was gone in the United States, and now it's on the rise again. Why? Because these kids come here and we plug them into the schools. You have to make sure that your kids have to have all of their shots before your kids are allowed in public schools. Now, these kids, you can't tell from the country of origin if they have their shots or if they have a criminal record. You can't tell. We can't tell. The solution is not to bring kids here. The solution is for people to go to these other countries and help them. But if the federal government won't secure the border, then it allows the drug cartel to run northern Mexico. And that's the problem. We can stop this if we would control the border again and kick the cartel out of northern Mexico.
I was in Austin last week, listening to a State Affairs Committee hearing to talk about sanctuary cities. And during the course of that committee hearing, it was mentioned that 6,600 illegal aliens are in Texas jails, based on a figure of about $56 a day for each prisoner. Over the course of a year, it cost Texas $155 million, there take a million or two, to house these 6,600 illegal aliens. The federal government reimburses the state of Texas and the local municipalities that are housing these prisoners at a grand total of $8 million. I know that you guys are fiscally conservative. You want to stop spending at the federal level. But at some point, will you have to supply the states who are taking on a great burden, a fiscal burden, from the lack of federal action on these illegal aliens and reimburse them the money they need to take? What's your answer?
That's like asking the question, should we turn the heat up or close the front door? I'd rather close the front door. And so if we're going to spend money somewhere, I want to spend it on closing the border, and it takes care of the problem. If Israel can secure its borders, America can secure its borders.
Thank you. Greg?
Yeah. First, I want to, you mentioned the federal government reimburses the state. The federal government can't reimburse the state because the federal government doesn't have any money.
Right.
The federal government gives the state its money back that it stole through illegal taxation. But I agree with Steve, if we closed the border, secured it, we wouldn't have the problem to try to beg the federal government to give us our own money back.
Right. Thank you. I want to move to another question, and this touches back on the Mideast, the refugee crisis we have in America, the resettlement of immigrants coming here legally, and the lack of a melting pot in America anymore, and the multiculturalism that is taught in our schools and is actually practiced in many, many communities in America. I would like to ask you, should the U.S. Congress go ahead and put legislation that would outlaw Sharia law in the United States? Craig?
So the Congress doesn't need to put legislation in to outlaw Sharia law. The U.S. Constitution already does that. We just have to follow what's already on the books. If it would make people feel better to write a bill that says Sharia law is illegal, then my office would write that and put it forward. But I think we should just follow our Constitution. It's already there in black and white. Sharia law inside this country is unconstitutional, and it cannot be allowed.
Well, before I get to you, Steve, Dallas has already allowed Sharia in civil cases instead of, they're not doing the criminal side of it, but they're allowing them to adjudicate civil issues with a Sharia court in some of the Dallas neighborhoods. So maybe it might, it's not merely a question of making us feel good to have legislation in, and maybe it is unconstitutional, but they do so much that is unconstitutional these days that maybe we need to spell it out for them. Would you care to comment further on that?
Yeah, so you can make the law, if Dallas is allowing it and some judge has authorized it, it's a federal judge. Congress has the power to impeach a judge. You can remove them from the bench for not following their constitutional mandate. It's time to hold people accountable for their actions.
Steve?
So Oklahoma tried to pass a law like that, and they put no Sharia law in it. The problem is that there's this thing called the First Amendment, and it says that there shall not be a religious test on any law, which I think we support that. And there's a way to do it, which you simply say, in American laws, you have to abide by, in American courts, you have to abide by American law. We had a bill like that go through the House in the 83rd session and the 84th section, and it wasn't the Democrats that killed it, it was the Republican leadership, Joe Strauss, and Debbie Riddle. You can thank Debbie Riddle in House District 150 for killing that bill in calendars. Why? Because Strauss didn't want it on the floor. Look, American law and American courts is what we should live by. We should not, and if there ever was a document that should call for the impeachment of a Supreme Court justice, it's Justice Stevens' book, which basically says that the Supreme Court should start listening to the laws of other nations. Bull. This is